My name is Mara Whitfield. I'm 36 years old, and the night my family finally understood what I had been doing for them, I was sitting at table 19 with the caterers, not near the stage, not with my parents, not with my brother and his wife, who were smiling under the gold lights like they had built the whole room themselves. Table 19 was behind a pillar, close enough to the kitchen doors that every time they opened, I could smell garlic butter and hear trays being stacked. My place card had been folded in half and rewritten by hand. Mara Whitfield Vendor Support. I remember looking at those two words for a long time. Vendor Support. I had paid a deposit for that ballroom. I had corrected the grant language that made the whole fundraiser legal. I had spent 3 months quietly fixing the mistakes my brother had made while he called me too cautious in front of everyone. And still, when I arrived that evening, my mother touched my elbow and whispered, "Just sit where we put you tonight. We don't want donors asking confusing questions." I didn't argue. I didn't embarrass her. I just set my black folder on my lap, smoothed the front of my dress, and sat down behind the pillar. If you have ever been the person everyone relies on, but nobody introduces properly, stay with me. You'll understand why I stayed quiet that night longer than anyone expected. My family always loved presentation. That was the first thing people noticed about us. My father, Richard Whitfield, had been a real estate broker for almost 40 years. He never entered a room without checking his cufflinks. My mother, Elaine, believed a family's reputation was like crystal, beautiful, expensive, and easy to crack if the wrong person spoke too honestly. My younger brother, Preston, inherited both of them in the worst way. He had my father's confidence without his discipline and my mother's charm without her restraint. Preston was handsome, loud, and very good at making people feel like they were already part of his next success story. He could walk into a room with an unpaid credit card bill in his pocket and leave with someone offering him an investment. I was different. Not better, just different. I noticed missing numbers. I read contracts before signing them. I remembered what people said in meetings. I kept receipts. I asked the second question, the one people didn't like. In my family, that made me difficult. When I was younger, they called me serious, then careful, then negative. By the time I was in my 30s, the word had become rigid. Preston was visionary. I was rigid. Preston was social. I was awkward. Preston was building something. I was good with paperwork. That was how they described my whole career. Good with paperwork. In reality, I was a compliance director for a regional medical foundation in Portland. My job was to review funding agreements, audit nonprofit spending, and make sure large donations were used exactly the way donors and state regulators required. It was not glamorous work. There were no ribbon cuttings for the person who caught the clause that would have caused a lawsuit. Nobody raised a glass to the woman who noticed that restricted funds had been placed in the wrong account. But my work mattered. I had learned that early. Money can do good things, but only when honest people keep their hands steady around it. That was something my family never respected because it was not visible enough. They respected stages, photos, announcements, names printed on programs. My brother understood that better than anyone. A year before the dinner at Table 19, Preston started a nonprofit called Bright Harbor Initiative. At least that was what he called it. On paper, it was supposed to help families of children receiving long-term hospital care by providing meal cards, transportation help, and short-term housing grants. It sounded beautiful. It also sounded familiar because I had talked about that exact need for years. I had seen parents sleeping in chairs beside hospital beds. I had seen mothers ration parking money. I had watched fathers cry quietly in elevators because they could not afford another week away from work. So when Preston told the family he wanted to help those families, I wanted to believe him. I really did. He came to my apartment one Sunday afternoon with a leather notebook, 2 coffees, and the kind of humble expression he used when he needed something. "Mara," he said, sitting at my kitchen table, "I know we don't always see things the same way, but I need your brain on this." That sentence should have warned me. In my family, your brain usually meant unpaid labor. He said he had donors interested. He said his wife, Celia, had connections through her country club. He said Mom and Dad were willing to host small events. He just needed help making everything clean. That was the word he used, clean. I asked if he had filed the nonprofit registration. He said it was in process. I asked if he had a board. He said he had people in mind. I asked if any donations had already been accepted. He looked away for half a second. That was when I knew something was wrong. Over the next month, I discovered the truth slowly, the way you find water damage behind a painted wall. Preston had accepted checks before the entity was fully registered. He had promised tax letters he was not yet authorized to provide. He had used phrases like hospital-affiliated in donor emails, even though no hospital had officially partnered with him. Worst of all, he had mentioned my name. Not directly enough to be a legal signature, but clearly enough to suggest I was overseeing the project. One donor had written, "Wonderful to know Mara is handling compliance." I remember reading that sentence 3 times. Then I called Preston. He laughed before I finished speaking. "Oh, come on," he said. "It's not like I forged your name. You implied I was supervising funds." I implied you were helping your family. There it was, the sentence that always closed the trap. Helping your family. I told him he had to stop using my name immediately. I told him every donor communication needed to be corrected. I told him he needed a real board, separate accounts, written policies, and proper disclosures before one more dollar moved. He sighed into the phone like I was ruining a birthday party. This is why people don't tell you things, Mara. You make everything heavy. Maybe I did. But heavy things fall when nobody holds them correctly. For a while I thought he listened. He sent revised documents. I corrected them. He complained, but he made changes. I drafted a spending policy. I found him a nonprofit accountant. I introduced him to a retired hospital administrator named Joan Mercer, one of the most respected women I knew. Joan was 72, sharp as a blade, and kind in a way that never confused kindness with weakness. She agreed to meet Preston once. Afterward, she called me and said, "Your brother likes applause more than structure." I closed my eyes when she said it. I know, then be careful what you attach your name to. I am. But I wasn't careful enough. Because he was still my brother. Because my parents kept saying this could be his chance. Because Celia cried once in my kitchen and told me Preston needed someone to believe in him. Because I had spent my whole life being the one who fixed things quietly enough that no one had to admit they were broken. The fundraiser was announced in March. A formal dinner at the Harrington Hotel, 200 guests, silent auction, donor presentation, local press, and a keynote from a hospital executive. Preston called it the launch event. My mother called it our family's proudest night. I called it premature. By then, Bright Harbor's paperwork was mostly correct, but not complete enough for the kind of claims Preston wanted to make. He was already talking about annual grants, hospital partnerships, and expanding to 3 cities. I told him to slow down. He told me I didn't understand momentum. I reviewed the sponsor packet anyway. I caught 7 problems. He had listed 1 donor as confirmed when they had only expressed interest. He had described a restricted grant as available for general operations. He had used a hospital logo without written permission. He had included a quote from Joan Mercer that she never approved. When I confronted him, he stared at me across our parents' dining table while Celia sliced lemon tart into perfect pieces. "You're acting like I'm stealing," he said. "I'm acting like you're being careless with other people's money." My father set down his fork. "That's enough, Mara." I looked at him. He wouldn't meet my eyes. My mother gave me a tight smile. "Your brother is trying to do something meaningful. Must you always make the room uncomfortable?" I wanted to ask her if she understood that fraud was more uncomfortable than a conversation. But I didn't. I had learned that facts spoken too early in my family became personality flaws, so I did what I always did. I went quiet and kept records. I saved emails. I downloaded donor drafts. I took screenshots of website changes. I kept copies of every version of every document I touched, not because I wanted to hurt Preston. Because I knew one day someone would ask what happened, and I did not want the answer to depend on his memory. 2 weeks before the fundraiser, Joan called me again. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the concern underneath it. "Mara, did you approve the revised pledge structure?" I sat up at my desk. "What revised structure?" She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "I think you and I need coffee." We met the next morning at a small place near the river. Joan arrived with a printed packet in a blue envelope. I still remember that envelope. Pale blue, silver clasp. My name written on the front in her neat block handwriting. Inside were copies of donor materials I had never seen. My name was on the second page, not as a staff member, not as a consultant. As interim compliance officer, my stomach went cold. There was also a projected budget showing administrative costs hidden under family support services. Payments to a consulting vendor I recognized immediately, Celia's event planning company. Preston had planned to pay his wife's company from the first large donations before any families received assistance. Joan watched my face as I read. "I wanted to bring this to you privately first," she said, "because if your name is attached, your professional license and your job may be affected." For a minute, I couldn't speak. I just sat there with my hands flat on the packet. Then I said, "I didn't approve this. I didn't think you did." That was the first time in months that someone believed me without requiring a performance of pain. I took the packet home and laid every page across my dining table. I lined up the emails I had sent against the versions Preston had distributed. I marked every change, every false title, every claim I had rejected that somehow came back later under different wording. By midnight, the story was clear. My brother had used my credibility as a costume. He had put my name where donors needed reassurance, then placed me out of sight where I could not correct him. The next day I called him. He didn't answer. I texted him one sentence. "We need to discuss the donor packet with my name on it." He replied 40 minutes later, "Not now, big week, please don't start, please don't start." As if the problem was my reaction, not his lie. That was the moment something in me settled. I stopped warning him. I stopped editing. I stopped protecting. I wrote one formal email to Preston, Celia, my parents, and the temporary board address listed on the website. I stated that I had not agreed to serve as compliance officer, that my name and credentials were to be removed from all materials, and that no documents should imply my oversight. I attached the corrected language. Then I printed everything, not dramatically, not angrily, just carefully. On the night of the fundraiser, I arrived 15 minutes early. The Harrington ballroom was beautiful in the way expensive rooms are beautiful. Gold ceiling lights, white flowers, heavy silverware, waiters moving like they had rehearsed. At the entrance, a large sign read Bright Harbor Initiative, a night of shelter and hope. Underneath it, in smaller print, was a line that made my chest tighten. Financial oversight guided by experienced healthcare compliance leadership. They still hadn't removed it. My name was not there, but the implication was. A volunteer checked the seating chart and hesitated when I gave my name. Then she smiled too brightly. "Oh yes, you're at table 19. I looked past her shoulder. My parents were at table 1. Preston and Celia were at table 1. The hospital executive was at table 1. Joan Mercer was at table 3. Table 19 was behind the pillar. That was when my mother appeared. She was wearing navy silk and pearls, and she looked nervous before she even reached me. "Mara," she said softly, "please don't make an issue of the seating." I wasn't going to. Her shoulders relaxed. Then she said the sentence I will never forget. "Good. Because tonight is about people who know how to inspire confidence." I looked at her for a moment, then I said, "Of course." She touched my arm, relieved, and went back to the front of the room. I sat at table 19 with my black folder on my lap. A catering manager sat to my left during breaks. A photographer's assistant sat to my right. They were both polite. Honestly, they were kinder to me than most of my relatives were that night. From behind the pillar, I watched my family perform. My father shook hands. My mother accepted compliments. Celia moved through the room in a cream dress, laughing softly with donors. Preston stood near the stage, glowing. People kept saying how proud my parents must be. My mother kept saying, "We are." No one mentioned me. Halfway through dinner, Preston took the stage. He was good, I will give him that. He spoke about families sleeping in hospital chairs. He spoke about dignity. He spoke about community responsibility. He even paused at the right moments. Then he said, Bright Harbor was built by family. Every one of us brought what we could. Vision, compassion, expertise. His eyes moved across the room and landed on me for half a second. Then he looked away. It was not recognition. It was control. He wanted me to know he could use the idea of me without giving me a place. Then he introduced the hospital executive, Dr. Samuel Ortiz. I knew Dr. Ortiz professionally, though not closely. He was cautious, respected, and not easily impressed. I had reviewed 2 foundation agreements involving his department the year before. He walked to the podium with a folded speech. He congratulated the room. He thanked donors. He spoke carefully about the burden families carry during long-term treatment. Then he paused. I saw him look down at his notes, then toward Joan. Something shifted in his face. He adjusted the microphone. "Before I continue," he said, "I want to clarify something important. Several donors have asked me tonight whether Bright Harbor Initiative is formally partnered with our hospital system." The room became still. Preston's smile froze. Dr. Ortiz continued, "At this time, no formal partnership agreement has been executed." A small murmur moved through the ballroom. My mother turned her head slowly toward Preston. He stepped forward slightly, but Dr. Ortiz raised one hand with polite authority. "I also want to acknowledge the person whose compliance concerns prevented premature use of hospital branding and protected both donors and families from confusion." My fingers tightened around the folder. I already knew Dr. Ortiz looked directly toward table 19. "Ms. Mara Whitfield, would you please stand?" For a second I didn't move, not because I was afraid. Because the room had spent so long not seeing me that being seen felt almost unnatural. Then the catering manager beside me whispered, "I think that's you." I stood. My parents looked stunned. Celia's mouth parted. Preston's face drained in a way I had never seen before. Dr. Ortiz nodded to me. "Whitfield has not been serving as Bright Harbor's compliance officer, despite language some of you may have seen. In fact, she formally objected to that description. Her documentation was thorough, accurate, and important." The room was silent now, not uncomfortable. Listening. That was worse for Preston. Joan stood next. She didn't have a microphone, but her voice carried. "As a temporary board advisor, I have reviewed Ms. Whitfield's concerns. I support them." That was the moment the room changed. Not loudly. No one gasped like people do in movies. But donors looked down at their programs. A man at table 4 whispered to his wife. A woman from the auction committee closed the sponsor packet in front of her. Preston moved toward the microphone. "Of course," he said quickly. "This is all just procedural. My sister is very detail-oriented, sometimes overly so." There it was again. The little family knife dressed up as charm. I stepped out from behind the pillar. It sounded very clear on the ballroom floor. I walked to the front, not rushing, not shaking. Dr. Ortiz stepped back from the podium. Joan's eyes stayed on mine. Preston leaned toward me and whispered through his teeth, "Don't." I looked at him. I already did. Then I opened the black folder. I did not give a speech, that matters. I didn't accuse him of being a monster. I didn't call him a liar. I didn't cry. I simply read from the email I had sent 2 weeks earlier. "My name and credentials may not be used or implied in any donor-facing material. I have not accepted an officer role. I have not approved the pledge structure. I recommend withholding public claims of hospital partnership until written authorization exists. Then I placed the printed donor packet beside it, the one naming me as interim compliance officer. Then the projected budget, then the vendor line connected to Celia's company. I heard Celia whisper, "Preston." He didn't answer her. Dr. Ortiz looked at the documents. Joan looked at the documents. A donor from table 2 stood and asked for a copy. That was when Preston lost control. "Mara is upset because she wasn't included the way she wanted," he said, his voice louder now. "This is personal." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, "You seated me behind a pillar and called me vendor support." The room went completely quiet. Even my mother closed her eyes. I continued, "That was personal. This is documentation." I slid the folder to Joan. She took it. And that was the end of the version of the story my brother had planned. The rest of the evening did not collapse all at once. Real consequences usually don't. They arrive in steps. First, Dr. Ortiz announced that the hospital would not proceed with any public association until independent review was complete. Then 3 donors asked to pause their pledges. Then the auction chair quietly removed the donation envelopes from the tables. Preston kept smiling, but it looked painful now. Celia disappeared into the hallway. My father sat rigid in his chair. My mother stared at the flowers like they might explain what had happened. I left before dessert. No one stopped me. In the parking garage, my phone started buzzing. First my mother, then Preston, then my father, then Celia. I didn't answer. I sat in my car for a few minutes with both hands resting on the steering wheel. I thought I would feel triumphant. I didn't. I felt tired, I felt sad, and underneath that I felt clean. There is a certain peace that comes when you stop holding up a lie with your own silence. By morning, the calls had turned into texts. Mom wrote, "You embarrassed your brother in front of everyone." Dad wrote, "This could have been handled privately." Preston wrote, "You have no idea what you've done." Celia wrote nothing. Joan called at 9. "You did the right thing," she said. I closed my eyes. I don't know why it feels so awful then. Because doing the right thing does not make people you love behave better. That sentence stayed with me. Over the next month, Bright Harbor was reviewed by an outside attorney. The nonprofit was not shut down, but Preston was removed from financial control. Celia's company withdrew its invoice. Donors were given corrected disclosures. A real board was formed, with Joan as interim chair. The program survived. That surprised people. It did not surprise me. The idea had never been the problem. The problem was that my brother thought a good cause gave him permission to be careless. My parents did not apologize right away. For weeks, they spoke through relatives. Aunt Lydia called to say I should have considered my mother's heart. My cousin Ben sent a message saying Preston was humiliated enough. My father left one voicemail that I listened to twice. "You always have to be right, Mara." I deleted it. Not because it didn't hurt, because I was no longer collecting evidence against myself. Preston eventually sent a long email. It had many paragraphs. Most of them were about pressure, stress, donor expectations, and how hard it was to build something meaningful. Only one sentence came close to an apology. "I should not have let your name stay in the packet." Let as if my name had wandered there by itself. I did not respond. Celia filed for separation 6 months later. I heard that from Joan, not from family. Apparently, the vendor payment issue was not the only financial surprise in their marriage. My parents sold the story differently, depending on who asked. Sometimes they said there had been a misunderstanding. Sometimes they said I had overreacted, but the organization was stronger now. Sometimes my mother said, "Mara has always been very independent." In that soft, disappointed voice she used when independence meant disobedience, I let them talk. That was new for me. Before, I would have corrected every version. I would have written careful messages, explained context, softened facts, protected feelings. Now I let the record stand. People who wanted the truth could find it. People who wanted comfort could keep their version. I no longer managed the distance between the two. A year later, Bright Harbor held another event, smaller, better, honest. No gold ballroom. No dramatic stage. Just a community hall near the hospital, folding chairs, coffee urns, and families who actually received help. Joan invited me. I almost didn't go. Then she added, "No speeches, just come see what careful work can protect," so I went. There was no place card for me behind a pillar. There was no place card at all. A mother named Celine spoke about using a Bright Harbor housing grant while her son recovered from surgery. She cried once quietly, and everyone waited without making it a performance. Afterward, Joan handed me a paper cup of coffee and said, "This is what your brother almost buried under his ego." I looked across the room at a little boy drawing with crayons while his father filled out a transportation form. For the first time, I felt no anger toward Preston. Not forgiveness exactly, just distance. The kind that lets you see clearly without needing to step closer. My life is quieter now. I still work in compliance. I still read contracts carefully. I still ask the second question. But I no longer donate my steadiness to people who use it to build stages for themselves. My parents and I speak on holidays. Briefly, politely. I do not explain my boundaries anymore. I simply keep them. Preston and I have not had dinner together since that night. Sometimes I miss the brother I thought he could become. But I don't miss the role he gave me, the difficult one, the rigid one, the paperwork one, the woman behind the pillar. On my desk, I keep one thing from that night, not the program, not the donor packet, the place card. Mara Whitfield vendor support. I kept it because it reminds me how people will label you when they need your value but not your voice. And it reminds me of something else too. A label is only powerful if you accept the seat that comes with it. That night, my family put me behind a pillar because they thought it would keep the truth out of view. They forgot something simple. Truth does not need the best table. It only needs one clear voice, one clean record, and the courage to stand when your name is finally called.